Welcome to the Times of Israel's What Matters Now, a weekly podcast delving into one issue facing Israel and the Jewish world right now. I'm your host, Deputy Editor Amanda Borschel-Dan, this week with ADL Vice President of Litigation, James Pasch. James, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a real pleasure being here today. Thank you for having me.
It is such a pleasure to hear from you. And I understand James is currently in Israel meeting with plaintiffs in a big lawsuit that ADL is initiating. It's a lawsuit against Iran, North Korea, Syria, and Hamas. So we're going to hear all about that and how lawfare can be used against these nations for their part in the October 7th massacre. We're also going to hear how the ADL is increasingly using lawfare to clamp down on anti-Semitism on campuses, for example. We'll discuss how ADL and other legal organizations are being creative and finding new ways to use the law in order to protect Jews and Jewish students' freedoms on campuses and really throughout the globe. So all of this and more when we're back.
Over 2,000 years ago, the Hanukkah flame burned against all odds, a symbol of resilience and hope that still shines brightly today. Now, Israel once again turns to light, not just to remember, but to protect and rebuild. As the country rises from 2 years of war, the Technion's brightest minds are leading the way, revitalizing the economy, strengthening national security, and shaping a future full of promise. This Hanukkah, we honor the Technion minds who bring light to the darkness, in our labs, on our front lines, and in our hearts. May the light of innovation illuminate every corner of Israel, heralding a new era of strength and renewal.
And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with James Pasch of the ADL. So, James, first of all, as far as I understand it, this period since the October 7th massacre that Hamas did in this onslaught into southern Israel, killing 1,200, taking 251 hostages back to Gaza. In this period, the ADL has initiated more laws, more litigation against these bad actors than ever before. So tell me a little bit about your journey into this type of lawfare, as well as the organization's turn to it.
Yeah. Amanda, ADL, as you just encapsulated, has filed more legal actions in the last 2 years than in the prior 100 years combined, right? And in order to evaluate before we get to the individual cases, we should evaluate why, right? The reason is quite simple, right? Which is we needed to use the courts affirmatively to fight back against a massive spike of domestic anti-Semitism in the United States. Prior to my litigation role at ADL, I oversaw ADL's operations on the ground as a regional director. I led our response to the aftermath of the Tree of Life shooting in Pittsburgh, and I covered our territory of Western Pennsylvania, Ohio, Kentucky, and West Virginia. And in my 4 years of doing that, there was one constant each of those 4 years, which is that we broke the prior year's historical record of the most anti-Semitic incidents that the region had ever seen. And that was in a pre-October 7th landscape, right? So with the
Now, these
significant
incidents,
spike,
James, were self-reported, were they not? So it is a combination of actual incidents and perhaps also the idea that Jews feel more bold to report these incidents. So you have to take that into account when you're talking about numbers, correct?
yes, I think people are certainly reporting at higher rates, but anti-Semitic incidents are also going up at alarming numbers, as also categorized by the hate crime statistics coming in annually from the FBI. Right. And so it was incumbent on us to, in the face of rising anti-Semitism, to add another tool in the toolkit in the fight against it. Right. And litigation provides a way to both hold people to account who commit anti-Semitic and extremist acts of violence. It allows us to represent victims of anti-Semitism like never before, hopefully provide a mass disincentive for engaging in anti-Semitism, and in the course of cases, create better and stronger laws that will protect the Jewish community in the long run.
Now, the ADL is not the biggest player in this playing field, and it's perhaps the newest, shall we say, but there are other players such as the Brandeis Center, the National Jewish Advocacy Center, and the Lawfare project that have been conducting this kind of lawfare for several years. So I wonder, why is the ADL turning to this at this point?
So our litigation work spans a wide breadth and depth of how to tackle anti-Semitism and extremism, whether that's our October 7th related litigation cases, whether that's against far right extremist groups in the United States or far left extremist organizations, whether it's happening at educational institutions or in the business place. And you just brought up some other people in the space. Really important that we're all working on things that we're all rowing in the same direction, right? ADL and myself and my team are currently co-counsel on litigation matters with the Brandeis Center, right? Over a half dozen matters that we are working on together. We launched the Call Network, the campus anti-Semitism legal line, weeks after the October 7th attack, in conjunction with the Brandeis Center and Hillel International and Gibson Dunn, in order to ensure that all of the players were at the table to solve the enormity of the issue. Um, I think we're all working on different cases, but we're doing so in a collaborative fashion.
Okay, that's amazing to hear, actually, because as we know, some of these Jewish legacy Jewish organizations, as well as these new upstart ones, don't always collaborate. You often see the same work being done by different organizations at the same time. So I'm really pleased to hear that there's collaboration going on. Now, let's talk first of all about the cases that brought you here to Israel. We're unfortunately unable to meet in person, but you are in Israel just as I am. And tell me about these big cases that you're working on right now.
Amanda, I would say they're not just big cases. The cases that we're working on right now are the most impactful cases of my legal career, and one of the most impactful things that ADL has ever worked on. Right? We're talking about ADL representing in court over 200 American Israelis that were injured on during the October 7th terrorist attack, right? And um, I think when we think about the importance of this litigation, right, one of the main goals of it is it seemingly took seconds after the October 7th attack for the world to lose complete sight of who committed the attack, who supported those that committed the attack, and who the victims of that attack were. Um, but within the four walls of a federal courthouse and within the pages of court papers, facts still matter, right? And the truth will reign the day. And this case is going to allow us, both in real time and for all of history, document who committed the attacks, who directly supported it with material support to commit the attacks, and it will tell the story of each one of our clients about what occurred that day. You know, Amanda, this is not a class action lawsuit. Every single one of our clients has their own claims and their own damages, and will have the ability to tell their story in court. And that's an extraordinarily impactful moment.
So you're talking about some 200 different cases that you're, I would assume, grouping together, but each individual has his own day in court. And is there any kind of legal precedent for this?
Just real briefly. So it's not 200 cases, but there are 200 plaintiffs, and they each have their own set of damages, and we'll get to talk about, submit their own affidavits in court about what occurred to them. So it's different than a class action suit. They're all individually named plaintiffs in the lawsuit. There have been cases that have been brought before against Iran, for example, but this case is the only 10-7 case that is a case against Iran, Syria, North Korea, and the foreign terrorist organizations themselves. And um, the why and what's the importance of that is we are going to draw a line. We are going to draw a line between each nation state and what exactly they were responsible for in the lead up to the attack. And in doing so, it allows us to tell the entire story of the events that took place. When we talk about precedent to bring this case forward, most people say, "How are you gonna sue Iran? How are you gonna sue Syria? They're they're nation states, right? Don't they have immunity?" Right? I've gotten that question 6 times alone since I landed in Israel, right? And the answer to that is foreign nation states used to have complete immunity, but back in the 80s, after a wave of international terrorism where Americans were being injured or killed abroad, Congress got together and said, we're going to make a terrorism exemption for the state sponsor of terrorism lists that the State Department puts together every year. Right now, there's 4 countries on that list. It fluctuates over time. There's been years that Lebanon has been on the list or Sudan has been on the list. They've since been removed from the list by the State Department. But right now, you have Syria, Iran, North Korea, and Cuba, who are all on that list and can be held responsible if and when their support of terrorism gets an American citizen injured or killed. And so we are using that exception to hold people to account for their actions or hold these nation states to account for their actions.
So basically, at this point, I would assume you're still in the situation where you're connecting the dots, collecting all the information in order to prove your case, or has that already been accomplished? What is the stage of your case right now?
Yeah. So right now, the first thing you have to do is serve foreign nation states, which is a complex process using embassies and State Department officials. 2 of the 3 nation states have officially been served. The third one, hopefully shortly. And while that process is going on, Amanda, we're already working on the question you just had, which is proving our case in court. So it goes in 2 stages. First, we have to prove liability, and then we have the damages phase of the trial. And so we are gathering all of the information we need for the first part of the case right now.
Okay, and what is the timeline as far as you could expect? These things can take, what, even a decade now?
It's tough to predict an exact timeline, but it should not be a decade, right? It could be, it could be 2 years, could be in that range, but it's not. That process shouldn't take a decade from inception to judgments.
Okay, so obviously, best of luck on this. Right, and in terms of getting damages, as far as I understand it from similar cases but different, in suing these bad actors, the damages are taken and put into a special fund, or are they awarded to the individual plaintiffs? How would they even see the money in the end?
Yeah. So, as I was saying before, each plaintiff presents their own set of damages and will get their own individual damage awards. It's not, a total for the case that is divided equally among all of the plaintiffs. It's the court awarding individual damage for each person. Um, and then we submit those to the fund that you just talked about, which is the USVSST fund, United States Victims of Foreign Terrorism Fund. And and over time, the hope is that the fund pays certain shares or certain percentages of that judgment. There are years where the fund has paid out significant percentages, and there are years where the fund hasn't paid out at all. There's concurrently a lobbying effort to ensure that the fund operates the way that it was intended to operate by Congress. So that money is going to victims' families, not just from this case, but for all foreign terrorism cases.
Okay, we're going to go to a short break and then we're going to discuss, for example, issues of freedom of speech, freedoms of religion, and ways that these are being used to help protect Jews in the United States.
3 million Israelis are dealing with trauma since October 7th. To help Israelis heal, Hadassah is there, with the largest rehabilitation center in Jerusalem, world-renowned medical centers, and youth villages. It's said, saving a life saves the world. Imagine helping millions. This is Hadassah, a life-changing force in Israel and the world.
And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with James Pasch of the ADL. So, James, one of the big headlines that we're seeing right now, at least coming out of New York, a couple of weeks ago, there was this very terrible to watch protest in front of the Park East Synagogue in New York, an Orthodox synagogue, which happens to be led by a Holocaust survivor. And there's a really disturbing protest outside of its door, as inside there was an immigration event led by Nefesh B'Nefesh. I spoke about this with my colleague, our New York reporter, Luke Tress, a couple of weeks ago on one of our podcasts. But one of the ways around this, as I understand it, is to create this attachment between Judaism and Zionism. Because obviously one can criticize the state of Israel. You can criticize a state, that's not a problem. But freedom of religion is a bit trickier, at least in the United States. So what do you know about this connection between Zionism and Judaism? And is that something that the ADL is exploring?
Amanda, before I get to the question of Zionism and Judaism, just to address kind of the protests that were outside of the synagogue at the Nefesh B'Nefesh event, right? It pointed to something that I think is very important, which is potential legislation that I know is actually just introduced to New York, but should be probably looked at more broadly about the closeness or the proximity of protesters to the entrances and exits of religious institutions. And right, it might be perfectly fine in the United States under free speech to chant horrific things at people, or even horrific things as they're walking into religious institutions. But what is not permitted is individuals being blocked access, being too scared to enter a place of worship, etc. And also individuals should not be subject to any threats or intimidation. So it's important that there is a dividing line there, and we have an obligation in the United States to both protect free speech and also protect people's ability to practice their religion, right? And which dives into the next topic about Zionism, right? Because the reality is over 8 out of 10 American Jews consider Zionism to be a central part of our identity as Jews, right? It is integral to who we are. You can't separate it from our Judaism, right? And so uh, the question is, where does that fall in the law? And the answer is, right now it's undetermined, right? We don't have a large amount of precedent to lean on that Zionism is a protected part of the Jewish identity and therefore part as our protected status as Jews, right? Um, and so, part of the litigation program and part of what I think all of the Jewish organizations collaboratively talk about are what are the right cases to bring forward, right? What could create stronger laws to protect Jews? And conversely, are there cases that shouldn't be filed because it would create negative law for the Jewish community, right? I always say, like, we have to be aggressive and strategic, right? And you have to do both at the same time. But when it comes to how we protect our identity as Zionists, as an integral part of who we are as Jews, that landscape is just starting to get formed now.
Okay, so this is a work in progress, but the idea essentially that you are using novel approaches to to create some kind of new way of protecting Jews. I'm sure this is being done in your lawfare capacity. We are hearing about, for example, abortion rights laws being used in this kind of situation as well. As you were mentioning, the ability to enter and exit a facility. That was, it was, what do you call it?
The FACE Act.
Right, the FACE Act, exactly. It was codified in this FACE Act, and that this is being brought out of the cupboards in order to help Jews. And I wonder, are you also looking in, the cupboards, going way, way back and trying to find other ways to help protect Jews that aren't being used right now, necessarily?
Yeah, the answer is yes, of course, right? And we're looking at it in a variety of contexts. It's incumbent when we do legal research or we're trying to look into new avenues of the law to better protect the Jewish community that we turn over every stone, right? I mean, we are seeing unprecedented levels in modern history in the United States, and it's incumbent on us to ensure that we're doing everything we can to better protect ourselves.
Okay, let's turn now to something that is, thank God, less in the news, probably still happening to a certain extent, but I'm talking about the protests on college campuses. And that was a central feature of the 2-year-long Gaza war. And I wonder how the ADL faced this conflict, this tension between freedom of speech and the idea that this is hate speech and we need to protect the Jews on campuses from this.
Yeah. I tell people all the time, you know, in the immediate aftermath of the attack, what we really saw was a complete lack of moral clarity, and administrations just not having the backbone to stand up and do the right thing, to protect their Jewish students on campus. We have seen marketed improvement from administrations over the past year. Um, Now, I don't think that market improvement came just by individual universities having moments of self-reflection. I think it came from organization and pressure from the Jewish community. I think it came from legal actions. It came from the ADL policy team and the ADL report card for college campuses. Right, there were many important levers to help create change, both within ADL and outside of ADL, parent groups forming on campuses, etc. And so all of that played a very important role for the Jewish community and responding. But college campuses, at the end of the day, have to both, protect the First Amendment, but also create an environment free of harassment and discrimination, period. Right? For who people are. You cannot do one and not the other. You must do both, right? Students may have a right to protest, but you should do it with time, place, and manner restrictions involved, right? You shouldn't be allowed to take over classrooms and libraries and administrative buildings. You shouldn't be allowed to camp out on the quad for 2 weeks, right? And when there are restrictions that are put in place in campus bylaws, you are required to enforce those bylaws so that everyone is playing by the same rule book, right? And when when campus administrations hide behind the First Amendment for acts that are not covered by the First Amendment, is when we get involved, right? I mean, we represent students that were physically assaulted on and off campus, right? Broken bones, people who were concussed, right? For no other reason other than they were Jews on campus, right? And that cannot be an acceptable reality for any of us in the United States or across the globe for that matter, right? We can't live in a reality where Jews are threatened, intimidated, and insulted for simply going about our lives, right? And so whether that is our campus cases, whether that is the rise of our K through 12 cases, or cases against business institutions where Jewish employees are getting discriminated against, or Jewish customers are being denied service, right? When the law is violated, when you cross over that First Amendment threshold into clear violations of the law, we need to be there to hold people to account.
So at this point, is the ADL, for example, back to the campus question, is the ADL working campus by campus and creating very clear bylaws at this point in case the Gaza war breaks out more or in case something like this happens in the future?
Yeah, our policy team did an extraordinary job before the school year started in submitting a list of recommendations to every college in the country. Right, here are recommended steps to combat anti-Semitism on campus. Right, and that work is parallel to the work that we do on the litigation side, the work that the Ratings Institute does on the report card side. They all weave with each other. And it's really important that all of those things are running down parallel tracks. The list of recommendations were released, and I'm sure there'll be updates as we approach new school years.
Yes. Now, James, I've kept you for way too long, but I'm personally curious. I imagine this is not your first trip to Israel since the war broke out on October 7th, 2023. Is that correct?
This is my first trip here since the war broke out.
It is. Okay.
It is.
So
It
my
is.
question to you is, you coming here, landing here, and having not seen the evolution of Israelis throughout the past 2 years, do you see Israelis as a healed nation at this point, or do you feel as though Israelis are still in October 7th today?
That's a really hard question, Amanda, because it's me answering for other people. What I will tell you is, as an American Jew who is experiencing anti-Semitism domestically in the United States, landing in Israel, and being surrounded by so much love and so much acceptance, and with no fear of who we are, um, brought an immense amount of both relief and pride. Um, and uh, and so the people of Israel remain extraordinarily welcoming, extraordinarily strong. I have, you know, when I meet with people on the ground here, um, the the sense of determination, the sense of self-identity is gives me hope and optimism for our future, both for Israel and for Jews in the diaspora.
I really appreciate that answer. Thank you so much. It's a fresh perspective. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Amanda.
Thanks for joining me today on the podcast as well.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate that.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's What Matters Now, our weekly podcast. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other podcast, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until next week, shalom.